Hello, everyone, and welcome to this launch of NORRAG Special Issue number 11 on Multilingualism and Language Transition, Innovations and Possibilities. Right, a couple of words about NORRAG after we go through the agenda. So we'll be hearing from one of the guest editors, Prem Piak, and then we will have a selection from the special issue. We didn't have a long enough event to have everybody from the special issue presenting, but we hope that the selection from the editors will give you a really good flavor of the quality of work and the range of themes that are covered in this special issue. And then we'll have a conclusion by Barbara Trudell, who is also one of the editors. Thank you. So quickly on NORRAG, what we do as NORRAG is to share capacity, surface underrepresented knowledge, broker policy dialogue, and co-produce knowledge. And we do those things in order for our stakeholders to be able to access the knowledge that they need in order to improve their practices and policies, to know that and to act with it, and to also amplify the marginalized and underrepresented knowledge and expertise that is absolutely core to NORRAG's mission. And we work in these 5 strategic themes, and our event today on multilingualism and transitions fits into our innovations and disruptions theme. So the NORRAG network, we have over 6,000 members now, all around the world, 50% of whom are based in the Global South. And we have almost 50% in academia, and then representation from all of the other sectors in society that you could think of. You can join the network by clicking on that QR code. I didn't say it quickly enough. Thank you, Camille. And there'll be a link as well that we will be able to share with you. So we are going to launch a poll now quickly so that we know who it is we have in the room. Okay, so in terms of the answers to that poll, we actually have 40% of the participants here today who speak a language that they consider to be minoritized. So that is quite a high proportion, and also demonstrates the importance of the themes that we are dealing with today. And then in terms of the people who have either studied or taught using a language that they didn't use outside the classroom, 62% of our participants have actually had that experience, which again shows you the importance of the disconnect between our languages that we use outside of the classroom and those that we use inside. So sorry, I just clicked on the sharing button there. So in terms of the commissioning of this particular NORRAG special issue, we really wanted to get to this point that multilingualism is a fact in many states. And multilingual societies require multilingual education if the education that they provide is to be accessible and quality and equitable. But providing that multilingual education is far from straightforward. So this NORRAG Special Issue number 11 on multilingualism and language transition, innovations and possibilities addresses those major challenges and opportunities in implementing multilingual education in ways that respect the right to education, right to cultural expression, and right to a livelihood. And our guest editors have done a fantastic job of curating a selection of 23 articles from 46 contributors on 4 continents. And those pieces explore multifaceted challenges and opportunities of multilingual education in 21 diverse contexts, particularly those with histories of colonial oppression. And so the authors are analyzing also how the effects of those colonial pasts persist in contemporary classrooms around the globe and affecting the learning and opportunities of millions. So we're very proud to be able to share this work with you. And I'll hand over now to Prem Piak, who is at Teachers College, Columbia University, and he is representing the editors today. Prem, over to you.
Okay. Hi. Thank you, Moira Nasewaro, which is my first language. Namaste, which is my second language. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of our team, so welcome everyone for joining. I would just like to, as you see on the screen, I represent my colleagues, Angeline Barrett, Rachel Bowden, Anthony Ishian, and Barbara Torrell. And thank you, Nora, for providing this opportunity to do this special issue. I would be very brief to introduce what this special issue actually about very quickly. So multilingualism is an integral part of our communities and societies. Our schools are more diverse and communities are becoming more diverse in terms of language and culture. And of course, we need a multilingual education to address learning needs of students from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds. For decades, we have seen a number of studies that focus on problems of language and argue that children and adult learners should be allowed to use the languages they use outside of educational spaces within them. Studies have also consistently shown that allowing students to use their home and community languages, and also L1, known as L1, is necessary condition for inclusive, equitable, and quality education. Numerous studies have also shown that it is extremely difficult for children and adults to learn using a so-called global languages, let's call this L2, that they only encounter in school. Yes, a few may be successful, but not everyone, not the majority. So the purpose of this NORRAG special issue is not to argue the point again, rather it is to make visible some of the many innovation and creative ways that education is multilingual or can be multilingual. In this special issue, we also explore the challenges and some of the ways these have been addressed at the different policy levels. The authors in this special issue also unpack different issues surrounding multilingual education and address how different strategies can be adapted and used to address these issues surrounding the gap between policies and practices. We did not impose any particular idea regarding what counts as innovation for multilingual education. Some articles report on the design and implementation of programs. Some focus on what teachers are doing in their classroom. Some discuss the design of curricula and national level policy. The various contributions offer different models for multilingual education. What they all have in common is that they link multilingual education to inclusion and equity. However, we are cautious that these models are locally situated and should not be understood as universal, which can fit in all sociolinguistic and cultural contexts. And of course, we can draw important lessons from each cases discussed in this special issue. This special issue is not a series of success stories, we should say. It is about learning to do things differently, whether at the level of a single teacher seeking to be more inclusive of the learners in their classes, or at the level of policy for a country. So moving towards this special issue raises some critical questions. How should new languages be introduced? Should L1 be maintained in education or through education? What support do teachers need for multilingual education? What learning materials are needed for multilingual education? How should assessment be designed, which is one of the critical issues with regard to the implementation of multilingual education? Is another big question that been discussed in this special issue is multilingual education actually politically feasible? So there are a lot of issues around the lack of political commitment in the implementation of multilingual education. So another set of questions for multilingual education that are about opportunity rather than difficulty. And the authors in this special issue focus on some of the pressing questions that we have been experiencing if in different contexts. So the first question is, can multilingual education bring schools closer to their communities? So there are cases, of course, at the theoretical level, we argue that multilingual education brings school closer to their communities, but there are practices that have been in different ways, for example, right? So what language skills do professionals need in multilingual societies? So this is closely related to how teachers need different kinds of language skills to help students coming from different linguistic backgrounds in the schools. What new possibilities does multilingual education create for pedagogy and curriculum? So how do we actually implement multilingual education at the level of pedagogy and curriculum? So another question that we discuss in this special issue is, what is the role of language in decolonizing education, in repairing conflict, inequalities in the environment? So there is a whole discourse of decolonizing education and repairing the losses or historical inequalities that we have been experiencing. So in other words, this special issue also pays attention to the historical inequalities that communities have been experiencing, and how do we talk about those losses, and how do we repair those losses when we reimagine the future of multilingual education. As you go through a special issue, you will see, of course, different perspectives. The issue of language is always political, so the views are always contested. As we read this special issue, you will see there are two different general perspectives about language. So one is, of course, monoglossic, and which is about how we talk about language in relation to multilingual education. In monoglossic discourses of the language, we talk about transition or subtractive models of multilingual education, in which L2 replaces L1. And also the objective of different transitional models of multilingual education basically focuses on L2 fluent learner using L2 for all learning. So most importantly, the transitional models of multilingual education focuses is still on creating linguistic boundaries, right? So we are not saying that this perfect works best, although we discuss all these models, but we accept the fact that this model is still one of the dominant models that nation states or different institutions or communities have been using. So another view of language is transglossic, so which focuses on the maintenance of home community languages or students L1, and also this view of language focuses on different additive models of multilingual education, which actually helps the development of multiple languages alongside L2. So the objective of transglossic models or additive models of multilingual education is to help multilingual learners able to use L1 and L2 for learning purposes simultaneously. So in this special issue, you will see how authors from different contexts are using different pedagogical models, for example, that ensures the total linguistic abilities of students, irrespective of their existing language abilities. For example, you will see some chapters focusing on translanguaging, meaning that how we can use both L1 and L2 or multiple languages simultaneously in the classroom to help students make sense of their learning context. So translanguaging also creates an environment where linguistic boundaries are not necessarily reinforced or enforced. Rather, the multiple languages are seen as resources for learning purposes. So in general, this special issue discusses both views of language, and of course, we are not saying that this view is good or this view is bad. What we are basically saying is, both models are still in practice in different world contexts. They are working or they are not working. So that's very interesting to see both perspectives. What we have learned through this editing the spatial issue. So of course, we have learned much from reading across 24 different contributions to this spatial issue. We hope that you will too. And we learned that this mainly, just allowing learners use of their main languages, particularly their home or community languages, is a form of violence that perpetuates other forms of violence, including, in some cases, physical violence in education. However, openness to multiple languages changes a school's relationship with the communities. We learned that multilingual education is not an option, rather, it is a necessary condition for all children to learn equally and equitably. We have learned that L1 foundational learning programs are being designed and implemented for primary school age learners, and about the need to prepare teachers for L1 based multilingual education. However, from this special issue, we learned that in secondary education, use of learners' home languages mainly comes about through individual teachers' own initiative. So teachers at the secondary level are actually taking their own agency to create spaces for students' home languages. We have also learned that language in education is rather political, that it can be a policy tool for excluding some ethnic groups from higher education or projecting an image of a government doing something to improve standards. So as you see that most primary schools are kind of more creating spaces for students' home languages, but teachers are struggling at the secondary level. And of course, the higher education is a critical spaces where students' home languages are still disregarded as a resource. However, we also note some silences in the spatial issue. the voices of minoritized language speakers are not as visible as we would like, although many of the authors do speak a minoritized language. Multilingual education programming risks perpetuating the marginalization of minoritized language speakers by not including them in decision-making about their children's education. So it's a broader issue of how we make policies. We also note that the reparative aspect is still not really much focused across the regions and countries. And we would really like to highlight the fact that we really need to start talking about the reparation of historical losses or historical wrongs we have done through the models of language policy in education. We had hoped for more contribution that explored how multilingual education can contribute to sustainability or repairing injustices. We hope that someone somewhere is experimenting how artificial intelligence to create multilingual education learning materials, but whoever, whenever they did not show up for this special issue. So there is kind of space, really growing space of discussion on how to use AI for multilingual education. So what I would like to conclude is by introducing the parts, the chapters or the sections that we have included in this special issue. The part one explores the role of language in kind of promoting or weakening boundaries between schools and the communities they serve. And as you see, the Basil will be talking about his work here. The part two focuses mainly on L1-based multilingual education programs implemented through primary schools. Aparna Dixit will present on the challenges posed for teachers by multilingual primary education program for Adivasi children in Rajasthan, India. Similarly, part three of this special issue is about upper primary and lower secondary education and looks at the challenges presented by the transition system. So Elia Kimu Sane will present on science teachers' multilingual practices in English medium lower secondary education in Tanzania to represent the authors for this section. Part four of the special issue focuses on multilingualism in adult learning, which is one of the key areas we haven't really much discussed in the field of multilingual education. So this section focuses on the mix of contributions on adult learning in different contexts, including universities, universities for sustainability and online learning. So Cornelius Gulere will present on minoritized language courses in Ugandan University to represent the authors for this section. Last but not least, part five of the special issue focuses on policy and planning for multilingual education. This is one of the critical issues that different countries are experiencing all over the world. So the contributions in this section focus on national level policy making, both processes and implementation, and design of national curricula and implementation. Fanny Hill, Kolikol will be talking about his work in the Philippines to highlight the language in education policy issues around multilingual education. So I think that's it from my side, and thank you once again, everyone, for listening to me. And yeah, let's move on to the authors.
Thank you so much, Prem, and to all of the editors of this NORRAG special issue. if any of you have been inspired by Prem's identification of missing themes in this NORRAG special issue, just to remind you, we do have the NORRAG blog, which is very highly read. And if you have any ideas that you would like to contribute in addition to what you hear today and read later in the special issue, then please do think about sending us a blog post so that we can highlight those additional areas as well. So moving now to the authors, the individual authors from each of the sections, who have 5 minutes each to present their paper as a representation of the particular section that they have contributed to. If you see my video come on, it means that your 5 minutes is up. So let's see how well we can keep to time. First of all, j'ai le grand plaisir de vous présenter Basile.
I have the pleasure to present you now, to introduce you Basile Ndubalo.
Pro-QEB Enfants du Monde in Chad, who's going to talk to us about his piece on Let's Make Way for African Languages and Culture at School. Basile, please could you switch on your video and take it away? Thank you.
Merci à NORRAG.
Thank you very much, NORRAG, for having allowed us to make a presentation of on the results of our reflections and our experiences on this. We have a problem with the sound of Basile Ndubalo. We're really sorry. Now, we were 3 contributors, 3 authors. We worked on this particular section. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, my name is Basile Ndubalo. I work at Enfants du Monde in Chad, and I have the pleasure to present you a small summary of our section in the special edition under the title Let's Make Way for African Languages and Culture at School. We aimed to identify the impact of the multilingual approach implemented by Enfants du Monde by means of what we call the Programme de la qualité d'éducation de base, that is the basic education quality program. So we started off saying that, of course, we have a monolingual education in our countries, either only in French or in Arabic. These are 2 foreign languages which disconnect pupils from their cultural and societal realities. So sometimes we see deplorable situations, dropouts, and most of all, the loss of self-esteem for most of the students that cannot adapt to that system. And in Chad, of course, we have a very rich culture, a pool of languages. We have more than 100 languages and cultures, and children really bathe in this universe. We have these very diverse communities and lives. And so the main question of the study is, how can school integrate all those languages, all those local cultures as well in learning and teaching pathways? And this is the reason why we try to identify 2 solutions. First of all, we try to integrate local languages in teaching and learning. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we base the learning process on we anchor them in the local traditions. So our Pro-QEB has experimented 2 approaches. First of all, an approach in teaching in the national language. So we use as a vehicle French from the Sahel. That means that the pupils then learn how to read and write in both languages feeding into each other and reinforcing the learning process. And then we emphasized multilingualism. And how did we do that? Well, we allowed in the school space to use different languages so that the children could understand the teachers, but also by using the knowledge of the pupils per se actively. And in our article, in our section, we, of course, talk about several examples. For instance, we have pupils who try to write sentences like the rooster is very strong, le coq est très fort. Well, one particular student, of course, used the local language phonemes to write one word in French. So we see that there is a linguistic transfer of phonemes from one local language to French. And this is something that happens very often in a monolingual system of education. So integrating local languages also facilitates the learning of mathematics. For instance, in the way you number things. For instance, if you count dimes and or money. So in the local languages, of course, when you count, for instance, from 1 to 6 in Dai, you add numbers, whereas afterwards it becomes a subtractive system. When you say bianta in Dai, it means that, well, you're lacking 3 units to reach the number of 10. So you have the possibility to count in your own language, which of course facilitates dialogue between cultures, which reinforces the learning process, but also it helps understanding the situation of what it's like to do mathematics. In French, for instance, you don't understand the relationship between the different numbers, such as 7, 7 and 5, 7 and 3, 7 being the reference value in the local languages. So students or pupils really feel imprisoned in a way. They don't feel like they can use their own knowledge. So this multilingual approach has, of course, allowed us to get some very good results by integrating local languages, by using multilingual approaches. We managed to make sure that students understand instructions, understand better also what they have to do in terms of homework, for instance, or what they have to do in the classroom. They gain in self-confidence at the level of their oral expression, but also the writing. And of course, they feel more self-aware, more secure. They're not afraid of expressing themselves. They're not afraid of participating in their own learning process. So this is a benefit also for the learners. And in fact, the study has shown that, of course, the results are indeed very eloquent. If we see, for instance, what pupils write in, for instance, at school, we know that, for instance, in exams, those successful taking part in a multilingual approach are much more successful than those, of course, following a learning path, a monolingual learning path. And at national level, they get much better results. So 40% better than, for instance, pupils or students in monolingual systems. In short, we can say that by promoting the local languages in local approaches, it is a necessity, it is an imperative, because local languages can boost education, make it more inclusive, and it improves the quality of education per se, which allows for a very satisfactory social integration. Thank you very much.
For an excellent piece that doesn't only take us to the ideas and the concepts of the richness of that diversity, but gets very technical about actually how it works and helps in language and literacy and numeracy questions too. Thank you. Okay, so we're now moving on to Aparna Dixit, who is an independent researcher in India, who's going to speak to us about her work with Adivasi children in India. Aparna, over to you.
Thank you, Moira. And thank you, NORRAG, for this opportunity. And hello, everyone. I'll be presenting insights from a multilingual education study conducted in Dungarpur, a district in Rajasthan, India. This is a region where nearly all children speak a language called Wagni, and at home, which is a non-dominant Adivasi language. This region is marked by low parental literacy and limited institutional acceptance of local languages as school languages. So while most teachers understand the child's language, the medium of instruction in schools is Hindi, which often results in a gap between the language spoken at home and the one used in classroom. To bridge this gap, the Language and Learning Foundation implemented a multilingual education intervention. The aim was to develop children's oral expression and higher order thinking in Wagdi, which is 11th, their own language, while simultaneously building foundational literacy skills in Hindi, which is the school of language, which is the language of the school. The program focused on grades 1 and 2 and was rooted in principles that extended use of home language in classrooms can foster better comprehension, confidence, and communication. This included extensive review and revision of textbooks, assessments. It involved teacher trainings, making classrooms more print-rich, and so on. Evaluation results from this program have shown striking results in various language and literacy skills, indicating significant learning gains over years. To study the impact, Language and Learning Foundation conducted a mixed method research study, which I was part of, comparing intervention schools with others. The study assessed pedagogic practices, teacher beliefs, language use in classrooms, and student engagement. The paper that we have presented here and the rest of the argument is about the findings of teacher beliefs that we have. The findings revealed a tension between teacher beliefs and actual classroom practices. Teachers in both intervention and comparison schools acknowledge the need to use Wagdi, especially in early grades where students don't understand Hindi. However, in comparison schools, Wagdi was used out of necessity, not as a deliberate strategy. While in intervention schools, it was integrated with pedagogic intentionality. The study also uncovered some contradictory beliefs. About 75% of the teachers believed that stronger skills in mother tongue aid second language learning. However, at the same time, about the same percentage of teachers agreed that only Hindi should be spoken in school. So it sort of revealed some kind of contradiction in belief that existed in teachers' minds. Another concern was persistence of a deficit view towards Adivasi children. Around 40% of teachers in comparison schools believed their cultural background, students' cultural background, was irrelevant to school learning. Such attitudes also we have seen affected how inclusive and effective classroom practices can be. One interesting observation that we had was teachers who believed all children could become good readers and writers were found to perform better in class. On the other hand, those who doubted children's abilities often blamed lack of parental support or poverty at home and showed overall weaker engagement in class. So this kind of contradiction in our observations about teacher beliefs led us to think, then what are the solutions here? What is it that we are doing right and what is it that needs to be done more? So the study that we presented argues that we need to go beyond restructuring. By restructuring, we mean updating materials or introducing new methods, and we are tending to believe that it's not enough. What's truly needed is reculturing, a deep shift in beliefs and habits of teachers and educators. Teachers need to be supported to reflect critically on their assumptions about language use, learners, and their own instruction. LLF's intervention made strides here. However, the path to long-term change lies in helping teachers make sense of why these multilingual practices matter. It is vital to advocate not only for restructuring, that is how teachers adopt MLE strategies, because we also found that at one point, teachers have adopted very sophisticated multilingual practices. But at the same time, we found that reculturing is needed. Our experience has fostered a strong sense that an approach of reculturing, which is essentially how teachers and educators come to question and change their beliefs and habits, is needed. It is also about how habits around language teaching are formed and are shifted. So we want to stress here that only then can teachers transition from surface level adoption of MLE strategies to meaningful and sustainable change in classrooms. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aparna, and for giving us the insight that believing in your students' abilities makes you a better teacher, certainly gets their learning outcomes up, and that normative orientation matters so much in addition to those technical skills. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Right. Moving on now to Eliakimu Sane, who is a lecturer at the University of Dodoma in Tanzania, who will speak to us about multilingual practices in secondary education in Tanzania. Welcome, Eliakimu.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Habari gani in Kiswahili. Thank you for getting this opportunity to present about multilingual practices in Tanzanian classroom. The education and training policy in Tanzania create a sharp transition where learners shift from Kiswahili medium of instruction to English medium of instruction only after a 6-week orientation. This policy ignores the reality, the learners' multilingual reality, where learners are fluent in either a Bantu language or one of the non-Bantu languages that exist in Tanzania, or Kiswahili, or both together. In Tanzania, there are more than 150 Bantu languages. Teachers are pressured to use English only in the classroom, even though they know that learners struggle to comprehend and engage in the classroom. Generally, this policy alienates learners and hinders learning. This comes from the evidence we gathered through a research that was conducted between 2022 and 2024 in Tanzania, funded by the British Council under the name LSATS. In this research, we visited 16 schools across 4 regions in Tanzania with diverse linguistic, geographical, and cultural background. And we made classroom observations and interviews with teachers and students in the schools. We revealed that despite the rigid English-only policy in Tanzania, teachers use informal multilingual practices to help learners understand the subject and also learn the language of instruction. Some teachers switched between Kiswahili and English, and others between a local language and English, just to help these learners learn and ease the burden of the language of instruction. We got some other teachers used the multimedia scaffold or brought in real objects in the classroom for learners to understand, because they knew that if they don't bring them, students won't understand with the language of instruction, which is insufficiently developed among learners. Some best examples come from one of the schools in Maasai area, where most children speak a Ma language. The teacher brought in different plants in the class and asked students to name the plants in their language and say the functions and the characteristics of the plants in the language before the teacher switched into English. In another class, the teacher was teaching about laboratory apparatuses, and the teacher brought in a video and played the video in the class for students to observe the apparatuses and learn about their names. And he did so because there were insufficient apparatuses in the laboratory to bring in the class. What we observed from these best examples, learners were very engaged and interested in learning, and the testimonies from students revealed that when teachers used English only, they became disconnected and discouraged in the classroom. But when multilingual practices were brought in the classroom, they were interested and they liked the teachers who mixed the languages and allowed them to use the languages that is optimal to them. The challenges we observed through this research is that some teachers provided insufficient scaffold or support to learners. And this is because they struggled to use multilingual practices in classroom. And in the end, they ended up dominating the talk in the class. And another challenge is that the power to use multilingual practices in classroom relied on the teachers. Learners had no opportunity, has limited opportunity or freedom to decide to use a different language than English until when they were called by their teachers to use a different language in the classroom. This implies that the rigid monolingual policies that, like the English-only policy in Tanzania, does not match the realities in the classroom as we observe the teachers using different languages to help learners. But also, these local languages, like the 150 languages in Tanzania, do not hinder learning, but they support learning. And learners are interested to use these languages in the classroom, and they become happy when their languages are used in the classroom. But also, we see that when teachers are not prepared to use multilingualism in classroom, they struggle and they become unsupportive in the classroom. And therefore, textbooks, authors also need to consider these multilingual practices in the classroom. And the language in education or the language in transition should consider multilingual realities among the learners. Generally, a general conclusion is that the success in using multilingual strategies heavily depend on teachers' training, available resources, and also reforming the policies that hold monolingual practices in the classroom. Thank you so much for this very short presentation about multilingualism in Tanzania classrooms. Thank you.
Eliakimo Ndatenda, that's thank you in Shona, for my country in Zimbabwe.
Oh,
And thank you for showing us the power of teachers to empower their students, how we can value the knowledge our students bring into the classroom and working from that basis with students so that they can feel encouraged, they can feel engaged. Thank you so much. Right, now we have the pleasure to welcome Father Cornelius Wambigulere, who's a graduate fellow at Hellenic College and Holy Cross, USA, talking to us about higher education in Uganda. Father Cornelius, please switch on your video, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. The video says it is disabled by the host, so you can switch on from there. Christos Anesti, Mwasuze Mutia, Eraire Shalom, Assalam. Good day, Moila and everyone. Let me share a few insights from my research on the integration of indigenous languages into Uganda's higher education system. Uganda is home to over 65 indigenous languages, which represent a rich cultural heritage. However, despite this linguistic diversity, the dominant languages in higher education have been English and Kiswahili. This marginalizes indigenous languages, which not only risks cultural loss, but also creates barriers for students who are not proficient in these dominant foreign languages. The question I address in this paper is how we can integrate indigenous languages into higher education to foster inclusivity and cultural preservation. At Makerere University, my alma mater, one of Uganda's largest and most influential institutions, significant strides have been made to incorporate 10% of Uganda's indigenous languages into higher education. Programs now include languages such as Luganda, the longest, Runyakitara, which is a group of Runyankole, Runyoro, Rutoro, and Ruchiga. And we have Luo, which is Leblango and Choli, Kiswahili, and recently the addition of Lusoga, my language, which just recently joined the group after 25 years of my first application. These programs focus on a blend of oral and written literacies, integrating cultural knowledge, indigenous sciences, and literature. This initiative not only preserves the languages, but also provides students with the practical skills needed to engage with their cultural heritage in a meaningful way. So far, the introduction of these courses has already shown positive impacts. For instance, students involved in Lusoga courses at Makerere University and elsewhere have reported increased job opportunities, especially in translation services and teaching, simply by highlighting their participation in these programs. These courses have not only made students more proficient in their languages and thought, but they have also helped build confidence and pride in their cultural identity. More importantly, they are offering a platform to promote linguistic diversity in a way that respects the right of citizens to engage with their heritage through education. The shift in higher education reflects a broader global movement towards multilingual education and instruction, which improves where L1 as a language of instruction improves academic performance and provides a richer, more inclusive learning experience. In Uganda, these changes are essential for preserving cultural identities while also enhancing social cohesion. Languages do not divide, they cohere, they lead people to work together. These initiatives contribute to the decolonization of education as they challenge the dominance of foreign languages in shaping the national education experience. As you can see from the slide that may be put on now, the challenge remains especially concerning the resources and the training required. Those people you see there are the resource that we had in 2010 in all the different languages that were introduced at primary and secondary level. And those books on the table have been written by students who have been in our programs, thanks to African Storybook Project and the Story Weaver. And you can see the children are already enjoying with their fellow children, even themselves contributing pictures. But resources like those required to effectively implement these programs at scale are lacking. Institutions like National Curriculum Development Center, which convened us that year, and the Uganda National Examinations Board are underfunded and lack the specialized professionals necessary to fully integrate indigenous languages into the curriculum. This highlights a need for more policy support and investment in training teachers, researchers, and administrators who can advocate for and teach indigenous languages effectively. The Ugandan experience provides valuable lessons for universities worldwide. The integration of indigenous languages into academic programs is not just about preserving cultural heritage, but also about creating more equitable educational systems. By recognizing the importance of linguistic diversity, universities can create an environment that fosters social inclusion, intellectual growth, and cultural pride. As global educational institutions face increasing diversity, embracing indigenous languages can become a key strategy for promoting inclusive and holistic learning. In conclusion, the inclusion of indigenous languages in higher education is not just an educational policy. It is a human right, a cultural imperative, and a means of building a more inclusive and cohesive society. I thank you, NORRAG. I thank you, Angeline. Thank you, Moira. Mwebale muno, mwebale ino.
Thank you so much, Father Cornelius, in showing us how it is that languages cohere and they help people to also cohere, to collaborate and not to divide. Thank you so much. A quick reminder that we have a very lively chat going on, which is fantastic, and it demonstrates the engagement of all of our participants in this particular topic. Questions will be drawn from the Q&A box, so if you have any outstanding questions, please transfer them over there and also upvote the questions that are there. And our final presenter from this NSI 11 is Fernegil Colicol, who is assistant professor at the Mindanao State University. And he's going to be talking to us about mother tongue-based multilingual education in the Philippines. Please, Fernegil.
Thank you for this great opportunity. The title of this presentation is Mother Tongue-Based Multilingual Education Policy and its Implementation in the Philippines, Challenges, Advocacies, and Prospects. I begin with the recent developments on multilingual education in the Philippines. The use of the mother tongue as medium of instruction in the Philippines was discontinued on October 10, 2024 through Republic Act 12027. The act provided for a reversion to Filipino and English as languages of instruction, with regional languages serving as auxiliary media of instruction. Previously, on July 23, 2024, the Philippine Senate approved a bill that pushed toward discontinuing the use of the mother tongue as medium of instruction in kindergarten to grade 3 in most linguistically diverse schools of the Philippines. An earlier major basic education reform implemented in 2023, the Matatag curriculum, had already sought the removal of the mother tongue as a subject from K-12 basic education. The use of the mother tongue in kindergarten through to grade 3 in basic education was part of the Mother Tongue-Based Multilingual Education (MTBMLE) program in the Philippines for the K-12 curriculum introduced in 2009. The latest actions of the government and education leaders in the Philippines toward MTBMLE show a lack of support and commitment to multilingual education, despite the multitude of studies supporting and attesting to the program's significance in terms of pedagogy, inclusion, and equity in education. The main reason given for suspending MTBMLE relate to inadequate teacher training and materials and lack of support in the community. This analysis demonstrates that the government leaders' actions to suspend rather than support MTBMLE are based on a narrow understanding of multilingual education, mainly driven by market-oriented education reforms, privileging a global economic agenda over significant local sociocultural factors, and narrowing down education quality into mere quantifiable outcomes based on international and national assessments. Now, with this present setup of the Philippines as regards MTBMLE, my key takeaways are, first, there must be an alternative view about challenging English dominance in education. This can be done by considering qualitative indicators based on local scenarios or voices and the aspirations of people at the grassroots level to promote social justice and avoid imposing the beliefs and values of top-level government leaders. Another is multilingualism, or the use of many languages in school setting, should be perceived as our resource, and that the multilingual education is our means for educational development. Third is education policymakers should learn from the past before deciding to revert to Filipino and English as the primary languages of instruction in the linguistically diverse schools. For instance, the dominance of English as a medium of instruction in the Philippines beginning in the 20th century, following American rule, created unintended consequences for Filipinos. It alienated most of them from their cultural heritage and exposed a colonial mentality, which signifies Western dominance with relation to culture and language development. Another key takeaway is the neoliberal influences on Filipino language ideology. this actually causes the reversion to bilingual education. In crafting policies for education, policymakers tend to equate education quality with producing graduates equipped with the knowledge, skills, and values that will enable them to compete globally, which is a new liberal or market-oriented ideology. This setup narrows down education quality as students are reduced to merely consumers, training them to become marketable. With this prioritization, we could sideline the Filipino cultural heritage, including their languages. As regards MTBMLE, the reversion to the previous system, which is the use of English and Filipino, is perceived as the most feasible means to increase the gains of educational investments in the country, even if this is not contextually and socially accepted to many Filipinos, such as the indigenous peoples and Muslims in the southern Philippines, whose cultures and languages are crucial to their identities. It is but sad to note that when most politicians are pressed to act and fulfill their mandate, they choose the practical, narrow, and easier means by reverting to English and Filipino. And we see here in the Philippines, despite these actions of the politicians, of our education leaders, there is a growing evidence of the effectiveness of MLE. For example, we have the study of the Assessment Curriculum and Technology Research Center showing that that a matched, showing that in a mixed method study on a linguistically diverse context, students under matched conditions by language that is assessed in Maranao and Tagalog perform better in literacy than their mismatched counterparts. A matched condition occurs when a student's mother tongue is used as medium of instruction in the classroom, as well as used as a language of assessment. Now, of course, we are actually faced with this problem because there's a low. We actually have a low performance in TEAMS and PISA, and many actually blamed on the misimplementation issues of the MTBMLE. And so the challenge here is really to improve the implementation part of the program. And the challenge, my final key takeaway is that we really need to support the grassroots level, the movements on the ground, these non-government actors, the academics, the consultants, who are really pushing for the full implementation of MTBMLE, of the multilingual education, despite the hindrances set forth by the top leaders. And so we see that there are movements, for example, the Talentayan MLE Incorporated, the SIL International, Filipino Normal University, and other universities. They're actually doing their part in improving, in finding ways on how to make this MTBMLE or MLE program works better for the country. And so that's my final point, is we really need to support the grassroots level, and in a way we are able to challenge the dominance of the top level government levels, so that in a sense we can make balance. We can have a balance in the processes of implementing effective multilingual education program. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernahil. And I think a really important point that you make there is how these international tests, tools, and comparisons have an effect on national and local policies. And so here you have some data on performance, which actually the performance is on a fundamentally unequal starting point. But what people will find in this NORRAG special issue is evidence on how you can actually implement this, how you can do it in order to make those improvements. Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Fernahil. We are now moving on to the Q&A. Now, we have many questions, which we will not have time to get through all of them. If I could invite all of the authors and editors who are here to switch on their cameras and join me in the virtual roundtable, and we can start addressing some of these questions. I think one theme that has come up in several of the questions has been to, and we'll have that on the gallery view, please. Okay, has been the question around resourcing, whether that resourcing is teachers and financing. And also we had a couple of questions on, sort of what's the justification for prioritizing here these minority or local languages. I think one thing that has come across in all of your presentations has been the evidence that is there in terms of learning, in terms of culture, in terms of coherence and collaboration, and then being able to move that into a debate around resourcing, as opposed to starting with a question of, oh, this is expensive, how are we going to find the money? Actually, this is effective, how are we going to make sure we find the money? Now, one of the top voted questions here is around internalized stigma, where speakers of minoritized language may begin to view their own language as a barrier. So what would you say in terms of your research? Maybe Angeline, I could hand this one to you, around that internalized stigma of minority language speakers and how it is that we can support them.
Thank you, Moira. I think that internalized stigma is itself a product of the education system. We do, some of the contributions to the special issue, and the editorial do mention this word coloniality, the coloniality of education. It relates to what Prem was talking about, the difference between a transglossic and a monoglossic perspective on language. It was part of what is the coloniality comes from the being monolingual as the norm, and trying then to design an education system for children as if they were monolingual. And, that's one of the things we saw in that initial poll. I think it was 40 or 60% of people who said, who are here today listening and participating in this event, saying that they do speak a minoritized language. And where we have education systems which are making children feel inferior or ashamed because they speak a language at home that's different from the one that's used at school, something has to change. And it's making our education system, you talked about resources as well, that is what's making our education systems so inefficient as well. So it's costing. And you see that in the number of some of the countries that people were talking from today. You have really low participation rates, where by the time you get to secondary education, they're excluding like half of their children or more, if we think about Tanzania or Uganda, from completing a secondary education, or even getting a chance of having a go at a secondary education. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I think another very important question that was also thought important by many of the participants was the question of multiple languages. So it's not a question of having a classroom with SAR students and an L1 and an L2. What if you actually have multiple L1s and then also an L2? Have any of you found anything in your research that could answer that particular question?
Hello. This is the case in Tanzania, where a classroom will have, as I said, in Tanzania, there are more than 150 Bantu languages. Mm-hmm. What we are saying here is that, yes, the language of instruction can be used, but let learners explore knowledge in the language they understand. Mm. And learners themselves can support themselves by translating to each other. If you allow them to use the language they understand, they can say, this is called so in our language. This is what we do in our language. Then when they have explored the knowledge, it's easy to guide them to transfer that knowledge into the second language. Mm. Yeah, this is what I can say about multiple languages. And to add that, You may find a teacher in classroom coming from a different society than learners. A teacher himself or herself may not understand the language of the learners, but there are some teachers, you can bring even an outsider who knows the language to act as an interpreter. We are here today. We don't speak the same language. We speak multiple languages, but we understand each other because there is an intermediate person that is helping others to understand. And that can also work in the classroom.
Wonderful. Father Cornelius, you wanted to add?
Yes, I wanted to add, thank you very much, that from my personal experience, I was able to learn mathematics and the sciences because of that practice. Teachers did not know how to explain the science terms to us. So they had to use different approaches of the language that we knew and the plants that we could see. So when somebody comes up and says, yes, these Africans are not good in sciences, they are not good in mathematics, and what, we do not know these concepts by those very, very, complicated scientists. But we have this science and mathematics in our midst. So when we use the language of the people, we are able to get on a common ground. And when we say that the towns are having so many people speaking different languages, the more we should speak all those languages so that we are at peace with one another, we know what each one is saying and how to understand it. Thank you.
And Aparna, please.
Yes, thank you. To answer this question, I just want to bring in a kind of perspective we are building in India. Language and Learning Foundation and my co-author, Dr. Dheer, we have actually worked on typology of classroom situations, wherein we categorize how many first languages are present in classroom versus what is the teacher's proficiency of those languages. And that sort of brings us to kind of a solution of intervention that might be needed, where if just the teacher learning language, few languages or some languages, conversational languages might be enough. Is it necessary to produce materials in any of those languages? So that sort of gives a direction if the typology and the categorization is done methodically.
Thank you. Great. Hill.
Okay. I would like to share the practice in my context. Okay? It's in the southernmost part of the Philippines, Tawi-Tawi province, wherein a teacher in a linguistically diverse context actually uses a different language, okay? a different mother tongue, which is not actually the official mother tongue recognized by the Ministry of Education. In a sense, the teacher is actually violating the policy just to accommodate the linguistic resource of the Sama pupils. So, in a sense, we see that really teachers are exercising their agency and they're doing it even, violating the policy. And that's how we see that teachers are co-constructors of the policy. And they are, in fact, really engaging, appropriating, contesting the policy that is prescribed by the top management. And so we see the dynamics on the ground. And so really, we really have to look into how these dynamics play out on how we can improve our processes, our practices in promoting multilingual education.
Great.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting how we look at these scenarios on the ground.
Thank you so much. And Anthony, this key issue that we're dealing with here, which is teachers who don't speak the same home language as their learners. We find everywhere in education there can be differences between teachers and learners, whether it's about socioeconomic status or their own education levels. But here, when we're talking about language, what would you tell us about that?
Thank you, Moira. I want to take from Elia Kimu, who said we can get interpreters into the class. Yes, so that's one way of doing it. But there's another way of doing it, and we call it in our own work soft translanguaging, where we use cross-linguistic comparisons. For example, I don't need to necessarily know a language to point at one learner and say to him or her, how do you call fraction in your language, in your home language? And then we'll look at the concept of fractions as it is kind of in that home language, and we ask the question as to what is mathematically correct about that imagery of a function of a fraction. So we say what's mathematically correct, and then what's not so mathematically correct, and how can we use both what is correct and what's not so correct to further understand the concept of fractions. So that's what we do, and it yields a hell lot of fruit in terms of enabling epistemic access in classrooms. So we train our teachers to do that, and we see them do it, and we see the outcome of it. So I don't need to know the language to be able to do that. I can just simply draw on the language that's present in the class and be able to then use it for epistemic access. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And what an important concept there, epistemic access. Let's at least get our first steps towards epistemic justice through epistemic access. Thank you, Anthony, so much. Now, for the remaining questions, our presenters here, I would invite you to take a look in the Q&A box, and you can type answers to the questions that are there while we close, because you know already what we're going to say in the next 10 minutes. So you can focus on answering the questions in the Q&A box. And we're very happy to have Barbara Trudell, who's another one of the editors, who is a senior literacy and education consultant at SIL Global, to give us 5 minutes of closing remarks and reflections. Barbara, please go ahead.
Thank you, Moya. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, so now you know the world of the editors over the past several months. You can see how rich the NORRAG Special Issue on multilingualism and language transitions is as a volume. The 6 people that you heard from today represent about 25% of the presentation, the issues, the challenges, and the really good ideas that are out there. And so we hope that you will really benefit from the NORRAG Special Issue as we have put it together for you. I just thought of a few things, and I don't want to take much time. The first thing that I heard that I really liked was, what is really happening in the classroom? My favorite research question, I have 2. One is, what's happening here? And then the second question is, what's really happening here? And I think we saw some issues about what's really happening here. You have teacher training, don't you? You have theory about how children learn. And then you've got the multilingual practices in the classroom that are happening because the teachers are in the place and they're figuring out what to do to help these kids to learn. And it is also clear that these behaviors, these practices, may or may not actually be supported by policy, but they are there. And wouldn't it be great if we took our policy provisions from the actual practices that are happening in the classroom, the successful ones? And then leading to my second thought about policy, which is sort of my area these days. We have seen that policy environment can be either very supportive can provide a supportive environment for multilingual practices and multilingual education in the classroom, or it can be very damaging to learning in multilingual contexts. And the sad thing, as we heard in our brother from the Philippines, is that the suppressive policies often follow what have been a supportive environment type policies for the use of children's languages in the classroom. We know that policy is not really about effective classroom learning. It's got other priorities, language policy does, but it is ironic, isn't it? And that successful multilingual education doesn't always bring about continued supportive policy. I haven't figured out why, but that does seem to be the case sometimes. And then the last thing has to do with policy violation. So we have this saying that no one ever got put in jail for disregarding language policy, even though it is a legal policy. And I think it happens, we see it in Africa where local decisions from parents, from teachers, disregards multilingual supportive policies. So you have policies that are supposed to, or you have languages that are supposed to be used in the classroom, and the decisions being made at the classroom level or at the school level are for English or for French, for Portuguese in Africa. So the policy is being violated to the benefit of international languages and the deficit of local languages. But what we are just hearing too is that teachers will violate the policy in the classroom in order to find ways to help children learn. And violating multilingual suppressive policy, I haven't seen anyone get put in jail for that either. But it is a very interesting way to circle back and say, so what's really happening in the classroom? Where is the power of teaching and learning? And where is it happening? The fact that effective teaching and learning is not being supported by national policy where language is concerned is a travesty. But we soldier on, don't we? So thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this, for allowing me to be one of the co-editors of this volume. I hope you really enjoy it. Thanks.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for that reminder of the power of what's really happening. And by reading this NORRAG special issue, you'll be able to find out not only what's really happening, but also what really is working. And so you have a QR code here. You also have a link in the chat to the full NORRAG Special Issue 11 on Multilingualism and Language Transition, Innovations and Possibility, that we had the pleasure to present to you today. Thank you again to our amazing editors and contributors to this important, timely, and incredibly useful NORRAG Special Issue. And we look forward to reading more of your work elsewhere. We look forward to having more contributions from the people and the participants in this who you have inspired. And thank you also to the readers of NSI 11 for continuing to inspire us to do this great work. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you soon in another NORRAG event, or indeed over with our regional coordinators who are waiting on tenterhooks for you to join them. Thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.